It's so interesting.
It's so interesting.
It's so interesting. It's interesting.
Welcome to It's So Interesting, where people talk about their work and life experience. I am George Spitzer. Today I'm talking with Chris Messner, who is a traveling adventurer. Okay, let's get right to it. What made you pick Cuba? Are you Cuban, for example?
No, I'm not Cuban. I'm just a simple American. I remember hearing stories growing up as a child through the 60s and 70s about the revolution, the missile crisis, Teddy Roosevelt from the Spanish-American War. Had seen some pictures, but not much had come out of Cuba.
There is tourism in Cuba, primarily for non-Americans, and most of those tourists go to Havana, and maybe a little bit around there. But otherwise there's not much tourism on the island. You're a traveling adventurer because you went outside of Cuba? Outside of Havana?
Yes, I picked up a rental car. I went close to 3,000 miles, crisscrossing the island from the Gulf of Mexico side of Cuba to the Caribbean side of Cuba to the furthest most eastern part of the island of Baracoa, which is that village was founded in 1511, and that's where Christopher Columbus planted a cross. It sits in a church. I got to witness all these things.
Okay, I want to position this in my mind, and then we're going to start seeing where you went. The United States of America is 3,000 miles wide. Cuba is a lot smaller.
Correct.
How much smaller is it? Because when you say you traveled 3,000 miles...
My guess, Cuba would be like if you turned California sideways. That would kind of give you a feel in a straight line, but with Cuba, I went crisscrossed in anywhere I could.
This sounds like a silly question, but I've lived in South America myself. Are there any roads in Cuba?
Oh, God. Yeah, full of holes. And some of them were so big they could swallow up a car. And in fact, the best way to describe that is they look like a lunar landscape in certain areas, in the remote areas, of course, and they have no road signs. So you've got to really guess where you're going sometimes, and you get lost. But I looked at it as, well, I'm lost, but I met a lot of people. I met very interesting towns. So as long as I could find a gas station, that was one of my concerns.
And was it a concern?
Oh, yeah. A few times it got very scary sometimes because I didn't want to run out of gas. And flats was the biggest thing there because the roads, they have one central highway through the center of Cuba, and it's called the Autopista Nacional Highway. And it's a 3-lane one-way, but there's no painted lines on there. So it's a free form, and you're just going, and that just gets you from one end to the other. And you can tee off to little villages here or there. But I definitely wanted to get off the main road and get off into some of the most remote jungle roads. Of course, the moving went slow at times.
So you had no map saying where the gas stations were?
No.
You have no travel guides. There's nothing that gives you a traveler's aid as far as where places are to stay, to eat, to buy gas, to fix your car. Your cell phone locator system does not work there.
No, cell phone does not work there. Maybe a satellite phone, but I didn't have one. It was...
Well, I keep saying before I get into the travel log, but I want to set the scene from your experience being there. If the embargo was lifted and freedom of movement was available to all Cubans as well as to Americans, would the Cuban population, I'm not talking about the leaders, would the Cuban population welcome it?
Yes, they would. They have said over and over the economy would just blossom. There'll be a day Cuba will open, and that will be wonderful for the people. I guess now I'm saying, as we get into the story, I have concerns about that after traveling through this land, what could happen.
Clue me in a little more.
Through this adventure, I went through pristine jungles that haven't changed since time.
When you traveled around the island, you mentioned there's the main highway going essentially through the spine of the island.
Yes.
You also said you got off the road, but effectively you've gone from one end to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
Have you also done the periphery of the island, the shores?
Yes, I have.
Have you visited every city or every major city on the island?
I would say so, yes. Practically every major city I have seen, and a lot of the many smaller villages.
Which means you probably, there's no way to statistically prove it, but would it be fair to say you're probably the most well-traveled American in contemporary Cuba?
Yeah, I guess so. Sometimes I wondered on some of those jungled roads, I must be the craziest American traveling. But I will tell you, it felt like Cuba at one time was the port, the most commerce coming and going back in its day, and America wasn't even discovered. And now America is discovered, and Cuba is almost like thrilling to get into areas that haven't been seen, so-called by adventurers like myself, into little villages and the history and the cultures of things. And then there's a lot of crossover American history. I could not believe it.
Is the island effectively a museum? Frozen since, like the cars, since the takeover by Fidel Castro? Or has there been changes bringing it up to modern standards of curatorial history? I'd
say yes to all. A lot of it's like, and I don't want to be cliche and say frozen in time, but there's a lot of things about it that it's like at a standstill. It's like a museum. Then there's a lot of things that they've modernized as best as they can with the materials and things that they can get.
Give me a couple of examples of the frozen in time and some of the things that were done.
The cars obviously make it feel back in time because that's all they have. I mean, that's some of the most modern things that they have. And boy, you can look at the cars and you can say that's a 59 convertible Impala. Not bad shape. And then some of them, well, yeah, that's been bondoed about maybe 100 times, but it's still holding up. A lot of the architecture is old Spanish. You can see some of the old original colonial homes still standing. Still held up, but it's rough, but you can tell. Some of the old churches, some of them are really ornate and beautiful. There was one church in Remedios, a very favorite town of mine. It was founded somewhere in the early 1500s, constantly raided by pirates, constantly.
Pirates?
Pirates. And so in the mid-1500s, half the town got pissed off and said, we're sick of this, and they moved further inland to get away from it. And during that time, the priest in the old church painted the high altar and the altar all white because they're gilded with gold. And over the centuries, they forgot about it. So they did a restoration, found out, oh my God, there's gold underneath here. And they hide it from the pirates. And it's beautiful, in perfect condition. And this town, all the architecture, all the walls are still the same, haven't changed. Just beautiful. So you can see generations of time holding still in different villages to where when the Russians, Soviets, came in the 80s, they built a lot of they needed housing for the Cubans, and so they built a lot of housing. And, of course, they used Russian designs, Russian engineers, but the Cubans did the labor for jobs. Buildings, they call it revolutionary architecture. To me, it's just a box on the ground, 3 or 4 stories tall. That's about as modern as I've seen. But other than that, everything's just pretty much the same. As an artist, as myself, it was a feast for my eyes. I just couldn't get enough of it. I thought I was in heaven. Village to village, they differed to the cities, which would be more large, hardscape architecture. And then all of a sudden you hear finer points of the history. I thought it was amazing. It never stopped.
You mentioned you're an artist. What kind of artistry?
I do fine art photography. I just discovered that I had an eye for it. At first I thought everybody sees the same way, and then I realized no, and then I realized, okay, I have something here, and I enjoy it.
Did you take a camera with you to Cuba?
Yes, I did. Immigration definitely went through the camera. They went through every lens, they went through every part of my camera pack, but I got it through.
To get in?
To get in.
Did they let you out with it, with all the film taken?
Surprisingly, I did. I had many people wonder, how did I get it out? But I did. But they still went through everything again on the way out. Although in Mexico they tried to take my film. I just didn't want to lose my film.
And you're developing it, and you're putting it in magazines, or how's this?
Yes.
How are people going to see this?
I have some galleries and some museums. I also have a website. I have a book. Wrote about this adventure, and it's coming out. This adventure to Cuba was, as I said, on a whim. I'm not a big professional organization. I'm just an individual person. Wanted to see what it was like on my own before it opens, because I felt that once Cuba opens, many things about it will become folkloric. And I wanted to see it for what it is, what it was, unchanged.
And did you see that?
Yes, I did. My first stop was, I wanted to see the Bay of Pigs. And I wanted to see it because I remember in school hearing so much about what it was like, this battle. And I thought, well, God, I want to see it. beautiful palms and sand, and I stood there. And of course, I saw some tanks and planes that were used in the battle, but it was not quite what I expected.
Tanks were still there? I mean, this was over 30 years ago.
Yes.
Nobody cleaned it up, so to speak, and...
Well, they're off the beach, but I saw some. They had a museum, but the museum was just a rough shot type museum, if I can call it that. Just kind of more or less, just there it is. Not like a museum like we would have in America. The machine guns and artillery, things that were used, are all there. I found it fascinating. You would have never thought a battle took place here. That's what was so weird for me, because I was expecting something different. My preconceived ideas. I did see memorials on the road going in through the jungles. And these were for the people that had fallen in the battle. And they were just kind of right where they had died. They put a little monument there, which I thought was interesting. Certain villages had their own style of cooking. Some of them were pre-Columbian recipes and wonderful. And that's where I really got to meet some nice people. I enjoyed that thoroughly.
So you went being.
Yeah. And then they would tell me little things to go check out. For instance, there was a small island, a 42 square kilometer island, still connected to Cuba by a little animal bridge, just a sliver. And on that island was nothing but wild African animals all over this island, and people had heard about it.
African animals?
African animals. And it was put there strictly for the high communist officials to hunt for their fun. So you had the Russian, you had the Soviets, and the Cuban leaders, and they'd be in there hunting. And I heard that they now made it a preserve, and maybe I can get in there. And so I thought, I'm going to go for it. I got to the gate, and they had to go through the checkpoint there, and I was fortunately allowed to go through. Sure enough, driving in, there was nothing but wild animals all over the place. And that was just because I got a lead from somebody on that. Very adventurous there. Wonderful. I went to the actual beachhead where Columbus first set foot, and it's documented there with a marker. What I found so fascinating, in other countries, they would make a visitor center. They would, not here. It's still raw, sitting as most likely what Columbus saw when he landed. Just a marker. There it is. I loved it because I could sit there and stand right there, and I looked around as far as my eyes could see from that spot, and that's what Columbus saw. In his journal, he talked about landmarks. There they are. He talked about hearing the birds and the flowers. There they were. I could hear all the same sounds, and I thought that was wonderful. That was just a wonderful moment for myself to see all that and feel all that and hear all that.
Did that happen in other locations on the island?
There was another location that Columbus landed. That was in Baracoa. That was, as I said before, the first village in Cuba that was settled in 1511. Back in 1492, Columbus went into the bay there in Baracoa because there was a storm. And he wanted to head back to Spain. Couldn't go. And in his journal says he was held back because he couldn't go. The winds weren't correct for him. So he constructed a cross, planted it on the side of the bay, and then eventually he was able to leave. Because of that delay, it inadvertently kept him to have Christmas in the New Americas. And that was the first Americas, I think, in the New World, as we know it now. But that cross was picked up through the new settlement. They found it, and they've been safeguarding it since 1510, and it sits in the church. And it's been there ever since.
A wooden cross sitting in a church?
A wooden cross.
Any safety features on it?
No. In a glass case, and I talked to the caretaker. Here it is. Again, something so raw and just sitting there. In a museum in America, it would be encased in glass. You couldn't get within 20 feet. I got to where I got inches with my macro lens, and I could take pictures of it, the grains in the wood. I thought that was a thrilling moment to see that.
I've been talking with Chris Messner, and thank you for being here, Chris. If you would like to contact Chris Messner or to listen again to this show or any other show, go to itssointeresting.com.
It's so interesting.
It's so interesting.
So interesting. It's interesting.